The Kyoto Protocol is an international treaty aimed to reduce emission gases that are contributing to climate change. Kyoto Protocol sets binding emission reduction for 37 industrialized countries. The Kyoto Protocol is based on the principles and provisions of the convention and follows its annex-based structure. It only binds developed countries and places a heavier burden on them under the principle of, quote, common but differentiated responsibility and respective capabilities, because it recognizes that they are largely responsible for the current high levels of GHG emissions in the atmosphere. However, there must be a detailed requirement. First one is to participate in Kyoto mechanisms. Annex 1 parties must meet, among others, the following eligibility requirements. They must have ratified the Kyoto Protocol. They must have calculated their assigned amount in terms of tons of CO2 equivalent emissions. They must have in place a national system for estimating emissions and removals of greenhouse gases within their territory. The next one, they must have in a place a national registry to record and track the creation and movement of ERUs, CERs, and RMUs, and must annually report such information to the Secretariat. And lastly, they must annually report informations on emissions and removals to the Secretariat. Kyoto Protocol rationale. Kyoto Protocol was adopted in 1997 and entered force in 2005. Its goal is for developed countries to reduce emissions by an average of 5% below 1990 levels and establish a system to monitor countries' progress. The Kyoto mechanism is to help countries with commitment in Kyoto Protocol to reduce emissions and remove carbon from the atmosphere in a cost-effective way. The controlling principles of the Kyoto Protocol, the number one is recognition of climate change and an increase in greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere resulting in global warming. Another one is global cooperation, which is aiming to create a framework within which countries could work together to address a global issue that transcended national boundaries and promotion of sustainable development. Not only the protocol wants to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but also to promote a sustainable kind of living and development, ensuring that addressing climate change will not be a hindrance of growth and development of countries.
Purposes of Kyoto Protocol. The industrialized world came to an agreement under the Kyoto Protocol to cut back on greenhouse gas emissions and carbon dioxide emissions in an effort to lessen the effects of climate change. The other one, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, by pledging developed nations and economies in transition to cut their emissions of greenhouse gases in line with individually agreed upon limits. Now, for the question, how many signatories and is the Philippines a signatory? On December 11, 1997, the Kyoto Protocol was ratified. It took a while to ratify, but on February 16, 2005, it became official. The Kyoto Protocol has 192 parties as of right now. The Philippines, under the 1987 Constitution, ratified the UNFCCC Treaty in 1994 and played a leadership role in the Kyoto Protocol in 2003, promoting balanced ecology and harmony with nature.
So, how significant is said treaty to the PH, or how significant is the Kyoto Protocol in our country, which is the Philippines? Since 1994, the Philippines ratified the UNFCCC, or the United Nations Climate Change Treaty, and the Kyoto Protocol. In 2003, the Philippines ratified the Kyoto Protocol as a non-Annex 1 country to the UNFCCC, having played a leadership role in its negotiations. Like any other country, which is the Philippines, Philippines is also vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, and in order to protect the rights of its people, or in order to protect the people of the Philippines to have a balanced and ecological quality of life through the years, our legislature department enacted laws to protect and preserve our environment. And these laws, for example, are the Act number 8435, or the Agriculture and Fisheries Modernization Act of 1997, providing that the Department of Agriculture, together with other appropriate countries, should take into account in climate change, weather disturbances, and annual productivity cycles in forecasting and formulating appropriate agricultural and fisheries program. Another one is the Republic Act number 84, or Republic Act 8749, or the Clean Air Act of 1999, that mandated the establishment of an effective air quality management program to mitigate the worsening problem of air pollution in our country. And the next one is the Republic Act number 9003, which is the Ecological Solid Waste Management Act of 2000, that aims to provide a comprehensive solution to the country's garbage problem. And since 2000s, the climate policy making and climate diplomacy was intensified. And so the Climate Change Act of 2009 was created, creating the Climate Change Commission, or the CCC, chaired by the President as the principal climate policy making body of the government. Another example is last 2017 to 2022 is the Philippine Development Plan. The Philippine Development Plan 2017 to 2022 recognizes the widespread impacts of climate change and the need for a nationwide climate and disaster vulnerability and risk assessment to deal with the impacts of natural hazards.
So for the provisions, the goal of the Kyoto Climate Accord is to lower greenhouse gas emissions that they were in 1990. Signatories are therefore required to create and carry out national initiatives that will lessen their carbon footprint. The Kyoto Protocol's rules had to be followed by 55 nations.
What is the impact to the international community, and also what are the criticisms of the treaty of the Kyoto Protocol? First is the impacts. First one is binding targets. The Kyoto Protocol set binding emission reduction targets for 37 industrialized countries and the European Community. Okay? These targets aim to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by an average of 5% and below and 1919 levels during the commitment period from 2008 to 2012. The next one is innovation and markets. Beyond emissions reduction, the protocol introduced innovative approaches, including market mechanisms, to drive investment in climate change action. And lastly is the 25th anniversary. The protocol influence extended beyond its importance as the first binding agreement However, it only applied to developed countries, while in the Paris Agreement, the recognized climate change as a shared problem and called on all the nations to set emissions targets. And the next one is with regards to criticisms. The first criticism is about insufficient ambition. Some argue that the Kyoto Protocol did not go far enough to curb greenhouse emissions and avoid dangerous climate change. Some nations felt like its standards were too optimistic. And the second criticism is the cost-benefit balance. Critics debated whether the cost of the protocol outweighed the benefits. Some saw it as an inequitable and inefficient agreement that would do to little curb of emissions. And the third one is the base year controversy. Controversy surrounded the use of 1990 as a year for emissions reduction. Different countries had varying achievements in energy efficiency in 1990, leading to perceived inequality. And the last one is exemption of developing countries. The protocol did not compel developing countries, including major emitters like China and also India, to take action, which some critics found problematic. The treaty originated from the 1992 United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or UNFCCC. It was adopted on Kyoto, Japan on December 11, 1997 and entered into the force on February 16, 2005. The protocol aimed to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, particularly carbon dioxide, to combat global warming, and also it built upon the UNFCCC's objective to reduce the onset of global warming by lowering the greenhouse gas concentrations into the atmosphere. The treaty focused on industrialized nations, requiring them to cut their emission based on the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, acknowledging that developed countries historically contributed more to greenhouse gas levels. The Kyoto Protocol first committed period spanned from 2008 to 2012, during which countries had specific emission reduction targets to meet. The treaty introduced mechanisms like emissions trading, clean development projects, and also a natural process to help countries achieve their emissions targets. Despite its significance, the Kyoto Protocol faced challenges, including criticism over modest emissions reduction, and also the goals and the absence of major emitters like China and also the United States.
So for the current news, this was published around June 27, 2003. The brief description of the article: last month saw the closure of parties' annual reviews for the second commitment period of the Kyoto Protocol. The results of this exercise show a push by developed countries to reduce their emissions and to be transparent about those efforts, a drive which started almost 20 years ago. I will provide the link for the article.